Julian believed I was merely a 5-carat diamond decoration on his arm, a silent prop in the biomedical empire he built on lies. He mistook my silence for submission. As he toasted his new mistress on our 10th anniversary, he had no idea I had prepared the ultimate gift. I was serving his complete destruction cold, paired with a restraining order and a glass of vintage champagne. My name is Elena Vance, and I stood perfectly still in a gown that cost $10,000, playing the role of the dutiful statue beside my husband. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan was suffocating, filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the drone of self-congratulatory laughter. This was the annual fundraising gala for Nova Gin, the biomedical giant built on my code and Julian Thorne's ego. Julian held a flute of champagne in one hand, but his attention was entirely focused on Sierra, the new 20-something public relations director he had hired last week. Sierra laughed at something he said, placing a hand on his bicep with a familiarity that made the board members glance away in polite discomfort. I was invisible. I was merely the wife, the accessory he dusted off for photo opportunities. "Oh, Julian, you are just terrible." Sierra giggled, leaning in close enough for her hair to brush his shoulder. Julian smirked, turning his back slightly to block me from the conversation. The humiliation burned cold in my chest, but it was familiar. It echoed the words he had spat at me in the back of the limousine just an hour ago when I had dared to question his relationship with her. He had gripped my wrist, his voice low and venomous. "Don't you dare question me. You are nothing without me. Elena, you leave me and you won't even have money for coffee." I snapped back to the present as the room grew quiet. Julian stepped up to the microphone, the spotlight gleaming off his teeth. He began his speech, charismatic and commanding, announcing the upcoming launch of Project Vitalis. "Vitalis is not just a product," Julian declared, his eyes locking with Sierra's across the room. "It is a rebirth, a new era for Nova Gin. And sometimes, to build the future, we must shed the dead weight of the past to make room for fresh, vibrant energy." The room applauded, oblivious to the cruelty veiled in his metaphor. I was the dead weight. He was publicly announcing his intention to replace me, not just in the company, but in his life. I turned and walked away. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. Inside the ladies' room, the silence was a relief. I looked at my reflection in the expansive mirror. I expected to see a broken woman, but the eyes staring back were dry and hard. I looked down at my left hand. The 5-carat diamond ring felt heavy, like a shackle I had worn for a decade. Slowly, I slid it off my finger. It made a sharp click as I set it down on the cold marble countertop. I pulled my phone from my clutch and typed a single message to Julian. "Congratulations. You win." "I give up." I placed the phone next to the ring, along with my designer clutch containing my credit cards and ID. I needed none of it where I was going. I slipped out through the service exit, the cool night air of New York hitting my bare shoulders. I did not hail a corporate car. Instead, I flagged down a battered gypsy cab and gave the driver an address in Brooklyn that would have horrified the socialites inside the ballroom. "You okay, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing my dress in the rearview mirror. "I am fine," I said, my voice steady. "Just drive." Back at the plaza, Julian likely only realized I was gone when a donor asked for my signature on a pledge form. He probably checked his phone, saw the text, and laughed, thinking I was throwing a tantrum. He would expect me to come crawling back when the credit cards were declined. He was wrong. The cab dropped me off in front of a peeling brick building in a working-class neighborhood. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 4B. I unlocked the door with a physical key, the metal cool against my palm. The studio apartment was small, smelling of dust and stale air, but it was mine. I had paid the rent in cash for 6 months using money I had skimmed from the grocery budget. I walked to the single twin bed and knelt down to pull an old, scuffed suitcase from underneath it. I dragged it to the center of the room and unzipped it. Inside, there were no designer clothes or jewelry. Nestled in the foam padding lay a high-performance server laptop and 3 encrypted hard drives. I opened the laptop, the blue glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. Julian thought I was a trophy wife who knew nothing of his business. He forgot that 10 years ago. I was the one who wrote the code. I was not just leaving him. I was logging in. The hum of the cooling fans was the only sound in the cramped studio apartment as I established a secure connection. To the world. I was merely the decorative wife of a tech mogul, a woman whose biggest concern was organizing seating charts for charity balls. They did not know that before the diamonds and the galas. I was the original data architect for Nova Gen. 10 years ago, the core algorithm that powered Julian's empire flowed from my fingers. I remembered the night I finished the code. Julian had poured us cheap wine, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You are the genius, Elena, but let me be the face. You don't want the stress of the boardroom. Let me protect you." I had believed him. I let him erase my name from the patents, convinced that his ambition was a shield for our future, not a weapon against me. I was a fool. On my screen, a grainy black and white video feed flickered to life. I had installed hidden cameras in the penthouse 3 months ago, disguised as smoke detectors. Julian was pacing the living room floor, his face twisted in a snarl I rarely saw in public. He was not weeping for his missing wife. He was tearing apart my private study. "Where is it?" Julian screamed, sweeping a collection of crystal figurines off the shelf. They shattered against the hardwood floor. She must have the damn physical key. He wasn't looking for a note. He was looking for the encryption key to his personal server, which I had safely tucked in my pocket. He pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer. "She is gone." Julian barked into the phone. "Draft the filing. Irreconcilable differences. And get Sierra to leak a statement to the press. Tell them Elena has been suffering from severe nervous exhaustion. Say she left to seek treatment at a private facility in Switzerland. Paint her as unstable." I watched him calmly orchestrate the destruction of my reputation. He wanted to make sure that if I ever spoke up, no one would believe the ravings of a madwoman. I felt a cold, sharp anger settle in my gut, replacing the last traces of heartbreak. I did not waste time countering his narrative. Instead, I opened a terminal window. Years ago, I had left a backdoor in the financial mainframe of the company, a tiny line of code buried in a system update that Julian never bothered to check. I typed in the command. Lines of data cascaded down the screen. I tracked the movement of funds over the last 12 months. "You predictable bastard," I whispered. Julian had been siphoning liquid assets out of our joint accounts and moving them to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He had moved nearly $50 million. He had been planning this divorce for over a year, ensuring that when he finally discarded me, I would be left with absolutely nothing. I needed help to interpret the deeper layers of his corporate fraud. I needed Marcus. Marcus had been the chief financial officer of Nova Gen until 2 years ago, when Julian fired him and framed him for embezzlement to cover up his own mismanagement. Marcus lost his license, his reputation, and his home. I picked up a burner phone and dialed a number I had memorized, but never called. "It's Elena," I said when he answered. "I have the ledger." 2 hours later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner in Queens. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the air smelled of stale coffee and grease. Marcus slid into the seat opposite me. He looked older than I remembered, his suit replaced by a worn denim jacket, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. I slid a flash drive across the sticky table. "This is proof of the Cayman transfers," I said quietly. "He stole from the company to hide money from me." Marcus took the drive, but he didn't smile. He looked at me with a grim intensity. "The money is the least of it, Elena. I've been digging since he fired me. I knew he was cooking the books, but I didn't know why until yesterday." He pulled a folder from his jacket and pushed it toward me. It contained medical charts. "Julian is rushing the IPO for Project Vitalis," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But the trials failed. The neural interface causes seizures in 90% of the test subjects. He buried the data. He falsified the safety reports." I stared at the papers, my blood running cold. "He is going to launch it next week." "If he does," Marcus said, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee. "People won't just lose money. They will. They will die." "Elena." I looked out the window at the dark street. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war, and I had the ammunition to burn his entire world to the ground. Marcus and I named our counteroffensive operation Swallow. The objective was absolute. We did not just intend to recover the money Julian had stolen from me. We intended to dismantle his credibility exactly 48 hours before the initial public offering. "We have to be precise," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the multiple monitors we had set up in his basement. "If we miss the window, the IPO launches. He becomes a billionaire on paper, and he buries us with legal fees before we can blink." "He is already trying to bury me," I replied, checking the encrypted police scanner feeds. "He hired Vance Miller. That private investigator does not find people to bring them home. He finds them to silence them." For the next 3 days, I became a ghost in the city I used to rule. I dyed my signature blonde hair a dull, muddy brown and traded my tailored silk for oversized hoodies and worn-out jeans. I moved constantly, never staying in one location for more than 6 hours, keeping my head down to avoid the thousands of surveillance cameras that form the digital eyes of New York. I set up a temporary base in the back of a noisy internet cafe to execute the first strike. I bypassed the firewall of the private hospital where Novagen conducted its trials. It took me 2 hours to crack their localized encryption. When the files finally opened, the reality was worse than the rumors. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "These aren't just side effects. 3 patients went into comas. Julian listed them as voluntary withdrawals." I looked up at the television mounted on the wall. Julian was on the news, looking devastatingly handsome and perfectly distraught. "My wife is battling severe mental health issues," Julian told the reporter, his voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "We just want her home. Elena, if you are watching, please, honey, let us help you." The hypocrisy made me nauseous. I decided to test the loyalty of his new toy. I paid a bike courier cash to deliver a plain envelope to Sierra. Inside were printed emails and photos proving Julian had used the exact same seduction strategy on his previous 2 mistresses before discarding them. I wanted to give her a chance to save herself. It was a mistake. Sierra did not have a conscience. She had ambition. Reviewing the data logs later, I realized she had handed the package directly to Julian. I had underestimated her greed and overestimated her self-respect. By delivering that package, she had inadvertently alerted Julian that I was still in Manhattan. "She is in the city." I heard Julian roar over a bugged phone line. The courier picked it up in Chelsea. "Miller, find her." I was at the 34th Street subway station when my luck ran out. I felt eyes on me. I turned and saw Vance Miller standing by the ticket booth. He wore a gray coat that blended into the crowd, but his predatory gaze was locked onto me. "I ran! Elena!" he shouted, abandoning all subtlety. I sprinted toward the turnstiles, my cheap sneakers slapping hard against the concrete. I vaulted over the barrier, ignoring the angry shout of the station attendant. Miller was fast. I could hear his heavy boots pounding behind me as I rushed down the stairs to the platform. He grabbed the hood of my sweatshirt just as I reached the bottom. "Got you," he grunted, yanking me backward. "You are coming with me." Let me go," I screamed, thrashing against his grip. The commuters around us backed away, terrified. Suddenly, a dirty hand shot out from a pile of blankets near the wall. A homeless man, his face caked in grime and beard matted, grabbed Miller's leg and twisted it with surprising strength. "Leave her alone," the man shouted. It was old Joe. For 5 years, I had given him a hot coffee and a $20 bill every Tuesday morning on my way to the charity board meetings. He recognized me, even beneath the dye and the rags. Miller stumbled, his grip on my hood loosening. "Run, Mrs. Elena." Go Joe yelled, clinging to the investigator's leg as Miller tried to kick him off. I scrambled onto the arriving train just as the doors hissed shut. I pressed my hand against the dirty glass, watching Miller shove Joe into the wall, but it was too late. The train lurched forward, carrying me into the dark safety of the tunnel. I slumped against the metal pole, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the stolen data on my laptop. It was powerful, but Julian would claim it was forged. He would spin it to kill the company. I needed the one thing he could not spin. I needed the physical corporate seal and the RSA security token that authorized the highest level transfers. They were in the biometric safe behind his desk. "I have to go back," I whispered to the empty subway car, wiping a smudge of dirt from my cheek. "I have to go back to the lion's den." I sat in the dim light of the internet cafe and typed the surrender Julian had been waiting for. I sent a short email that read simply that I wanted to talk about the divorce settlement. He replied within 10 minutes. He did not suggest a neutral law office or a coffee shop. He demanded we meet at our summer estate in the Hamptons. He set the date for today, which was our 10th wedding anniversary. It was a calculated insult, a final exertion of power to remind me that the day we vowed to love each other forever was now just another business transaction on his calendar. I prepared for the meeting not like a wife going to a funeral, but like a soldier going to war. I left the beige cardigans and sensible heels that Julian preferred in the trash. Instead, I pulled on a dress I had bought years ago and never worn. It was crimson red, fitted and sharp, cutting a silhouette that screamed danger rather than compliance. I looked in the mirror and applied a layer of dark lipstick. This was my armor. Before I left, I finalized the code on my laptop. I set up an automated transfer protocol linked to a voice recognition script. It was designed to listen for Julian's specific vocal frequency and keywords. Once he spoke them, the system would not ask for a password. It would simply execute the command. I uploaded the program to a dormant background process on the NovaGen server, ready to be awakened. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I saw that our private sanctuary had been transformed into a fortress. Black SUVs lined the lawn, and men with earpieces patrolled the perimeter. Julian had turned our home into a war room. Sierra met me at the front door. She was wearing a white silk robe, playing the role of the new mistress of the manor with nauseating enthusiasm. "Oh, Elena," she cooed, tilting her head with a look of practiced pity. You look tired. This must be so hard for you." I walked past her without a word, the heels of my red shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. Julian was waiting in the dining room, flanked by 3 lawyers and 2 bodyguards. The table was covered in documents. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly at the side of the red dress, but he quickly masked his surprise with a sneer. "I am glad you finally came to your senses," Julian said, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table. "We prepared a generous severance package. You will receive $5,000 a month for 3 years. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all NovaGen intellectual property, specifically the source code for Vitalis." I picked up the document. The sum was insulting. It was less than what he spent on wine in a week, but I needed him to believe he had broken me. I let my hands tremble as I held the paper. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. "Julian," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can survive on this. It is so little." Sierra laughed softly from the doorway. Julian leaned back, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. "It is more than you deserve for abandoning me," he said cold. "Sign it. Elena. Or get nothing." I reached for the pen, then dropped it as if my nerves had failed me. I feel sick," I gasped, clutching my chest. "Please. I need to use the restroom. I just need a moment to calm down." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "Make it quick." I stumbled out of the room, keeping up the act until I turned the corner. The moment I was out of sight, I straightened my spine. I did not go to the bathroom. I moved silently down the hall to Julian's private study. I pulled a small signal jammer from my purse and switched it on. The red light on the security camera in the corner blinked out. I had exactly 60 seconds before the security team noticed the feed was down. I walked to his desk. Right there, sitting on top of a stack of papers, was the FDA approval file he intended to show the investors tomorrow. It was a forgery, filled with falsified data to make Vitalis look safe. I reached under my dress and pulled out a slim folder strapped to my thigh. This folder contained the real data, the one with the patient deaths and the seizure reports. With a steady hand, I swapped the files. I slipped the fake file into the waistband of my dress and smoothed the red fabric down. I turned off the jammer and flushed the toilet in the adjacent powder room for sound effect. When I walked back into the dining room, Julian was checking his watch. He had no idea that the file sitting on his desk was no longer his shield, but a smoking gun that he would pull the trigger on himself. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady. "Let's finish this." I returned to the table and smoothed the red fabric of my dress, my movements deliberate and calm. I reached up to adjust the diamond clip in my hair. To Julian, it was just another expensive bauble he had bought me years ago, but in reality, it was a high-fidelity directional microphone transmitting a live audio feed directly to Marcus's server in Queens. "I am ready to sign," I said. Picking up the pen, I needed him to speak the keywords to bypass the voice biometrics of his Swiss bank. I feigned confusion, pointing at a random paragraph in the settlement papers. "But Julian, I do not understand this clause about the offshore holdings. Is this regarding the Alpha account?" Julian sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the stupidity of others. He took a large gulp of his scotch. "Yes, Elena," he said, his voice loud and clear. "It is the Alpha account. It holds the liquidity for the IPO. Why do you care? You will never see a cent of it." "I just want to be sure," I whispered, leaning in. "So if I sign, you will—" "Confirm transfer of my alimony. I will confirm transfer." He mocked, swirling his drink. "Once you sign, I will authorize everything. Just get it done, in my hidden earpiece." Marcus's voice crackled. "Got it. I have Alpha account." "Confirm. And transfer." Constructing the voice packet now. Julian was relaxed now, the alcohol loosening his tongue. He leaned back, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "You know, the investors are sheep. I told them the trial data was 99% effective. They didn't even ask for the raw logs. They just saw the projected profits and drooled. Sierra, however, was not drinking. She was watching me." Her eyes narrowed as she studied my hands, which were resting perfectly still on the table. She had expected me to be a weeping mess, shaking and hysterical. My composure was a variable she had not calculated. "You are taking this very well," Sierra said, her voice sharp. A little too well for a woman losing everything. She was getting too close. I needed her gone. I reached for the bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon on the table, my hand intentionally clumsy. As I brought the bottle toward my glass, I jerked my wrist. A dark red wave crashed onto Sierra's pristine white silk robe. "Oh my God!" Sierra shrieked, jumping up as the wine soaked into the fabric, looking like a fresh wound. "I am so sorry," I gasped, putting a hand to my mouth. I am so clumsy." "You idiot," Julian snapped. He turned to Sierra. "Go change! Hurry up!" Sierra stormed out of the room, muttering curses. The moment the door clicked shut, the dynamic shifted. Julian grabbed a napkin and began aggressively wiping the wine droplets from the table, his attention fully on the mess. This was my window. I reached out and took Julian's phone, which was sitting face down near his elbow. Earlier, when he had toasted his victory, he had gripped his wine glass with his right thumb. I had palmed a piece of high-grade adhesive film from my kit. In one fluid motion, I pressed the film against the smudge on his glass, lifting the latent print, and then pressed the film against the fingerprint sensor of his phone. The screen unlocked. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, looking up, but I was already tapping the approval notification that Marcus had just triggered from his end. "Just checking the time," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screen flashed a security prompt, "Voice confirmation required." I tapped the microphone icon on his phone. Simultaneously, I pressed the button on my Bluetooth earpiece. It broadcasted the spliced audio clip Marcus had just engineered directly into the phone's receiver. "Confirm transfer. Alpha account? Authorize." It was Julian's voice, synthesized to perfection, cold and commanding. The phone screen turned green. "Identity confirmed. Processing." I set the phone back down exactly where it had been just as Julian finished wiping the table. He had not heard a thing. "Stop fidgeting!" Julian growled. I watched the screen of his phone out of the corner of my eye. A notification banner slid down silently at the top of the screen. "Transfer complete. Balance 0. I felt a rush of adrenaline so potent it nearly made me dizzy. In 10 seconds, $25 million had vanished from his Cayman holdings. It was currently bouncing through 3 servers in Singapore and Dubai before landing safely in the anonymous charity fund and my new secure account. "I am not fidgeting, Julian," I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "I am just waiting for the check to clear." Sierra returned to the dining room wearing an emerald green silk slip dress that left little to the imagination, but her expression was far from seductive. Her eyes immediately darted to the table, locking onto the position of Julian's phone. Paranoia was a job requirement in her line of work, and she was good at it. "You touched it," Sierra hissed, pointing a manicured finger at the device. "Julian, the phone. It was on the left of your placemat. Now it is on the right." She touched it. "Don't be paranoid, Sierra," Julian muttered, reaching for the device lazily. She didn't even leave her chair. But as he lifted the phone, the screen lit up with a cascade of push notifications. His face went from flushed to chalk white in a heartbeat. The alcohol evaporated from his system instantly. "Transfer authorized," he read aloud, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and rising fury. "Transfer authorized." Transfer. What the hell is this? He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "What did you do?" he whispered, the sound low and dangerous. Then his voice rose to a deafening roar. "What did you do?" He lunged across the table, his hand reaching for my throat. I had anticipated this. I was already moving, sliding my chair back and stepping aside with a fluid motion. Julian crashed into the edge of the heavy mahogany table, knocking over the wine bottle and sending crystal glasses shattering to the floor. "I took back what I created," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The source code is mine. The royalties are mine. And now, the liquidity you stole to hide from the divorce courts, that is mine, too." Julian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "You signed the rights away. 10 years ago, I have the contract. You have a forgery," I corrected him, standing tall in my red dress, looking down at him. "You gave me a contract to sign 10 years ago. Yes. But I swapped the signature page before I gave it back to you. I signed a lease agreement for a storage unit, Julian, not the IP transfer. I still hold the original copyright registration in my maiden name. I never gave you Novagen. I just let you borrow it." Julian began to laugh, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He straightened his jacket, regaining a semblance of his arrogant composure. "You think a piece of paper matters," Julian sneered, stepping closer. "I have teams of lawyers who will bury you in litigation for the next 20 years. I will bleed you dry. Elena, you will be dead before a judge ever rules in your favor. You are nobody. I am the king of this city." He turned to the 2 massive bodyguards standing by the door. "Seize her," Julian ordered, pointing at me. "Do not let her leave this house. Take her to the basement. We are going to have a long conversation about passwords." The bodyguards stepped forward, blocking the exit. The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. This was it. He had just crossed the line from corporate malfeasance to a violent felony. He was attempting to kidnap me. I did not scream. I did not fight. I simply raised my wrist and looked at my watch. 5, I said clearly. "Grab her." Julian screamed, veins bulging in his neck. 4, I continued, watching the second hand tick. The bodyguards hesitated, confused by my calmness. 3. "What are you doing?" Sierra shrieked, backing away. 2. I looked up, locking eyes with Julian. 1. I tapped the diamond clip in my hair. "Julian," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I think you should know that for the last 15 minutes, this entire conversation, including your confession to fraud and your order to kidnap me, has been live-streamed directly to a secure server at the Securities and Exchange Commission." "Oh, and the New York Police Department just patched into the feed." Julian froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse standing upright. You wouldn't," he stammered, his eyes darting to the clip in my hair. "I would," I replied, picking up my clutch, and I did. The silence that followed my revelation lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the room exploded into a cacophony of digital panic. It started with Julian's personal cell phone. Then, the lead attorney's tablet chimed. Within moments, every device in the room was ringing, vibrating, or pinging with the relentless urgency of a disaster unfolding in real time. The board of directors, the major investors, and the nervous hedge fund managers who had leveraged their careers on the Novagen IPO were calling all at once. Marcus had executed the second phase of Operation Swallow perfectly. At the exact moment I revealed the live stream, he had dumped the raw, unredacted clinical trial data onto 3 major medical forums and emailed the entire package to the investigative desk of the New York Times. "Mr. Thorne," the lead attorney stammered, his face pale as he stared at his tablet. "The stock. In the after-hours trading. It is in free fall. We have lost 40% of our valuation in 6 minutes. Trading has been halted by the exchange." Julian stood frozen, his eyes darting around the room as if he could physically see his empire crumbling. "It is a lie," Julian screamed at the attorney. "Tell them it is a hack. Tell them it is a deep fake. We can't—" "Sir," the lawyer replied, his voice thin with fear. "The SEC has already issued a freeze order. They heard your voice. They heard you admit to the fraud on the live stream. Sierra was the first to break rank." She looked from Julian's purple, raging face to the terrifying plummet of the stock graph on the lawyer's screen. She realized the ship was not just taking on water, it was already at the bottom of the ocean. "I didn't know," Sierra said, her voice shrill. She backed away from Julian, holding her hands up as if he were contagious. "I was just an employee. I didn't know about the side effects. I am a victim here." "You shut up," Julian roared, turning on her. "You are in this as deep as I am." "No," Sierra shrieked, grabbing her purse. "I am leaving. I am not going to jail for you." She ran out of the room, her heels clacking frantically on the hardwood, abandoning the man she had been clinging to just 10 minutes ago. Julian looked back at me, his chest heaving. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, animalistic terror. He tried to lunge at me again, but he stopped when he saw the cold indifference in my eyes. He realized that violence would only add more years to his sentence. He changed tactics instantly. He slumped his shoulders, trying to summon the charm that had manipulated me for a decade. "Elena," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Baby. Please, you have to stop the feed. Tell them it was a script. Tell them we were role-playing. Please. Look at what we built. We are husband and wife. If I go down, you go down. You will destroy both of us." I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no love, no hate, just the clinical satisfaction of a surgeon excising a tumor. "I am not destroying you. Julian," I said, my voice steady and cool, "I am just turning on the lights. And roaches? Well, they are afraid of the light." Julian turned to his bodyguards, his eyes wild. "Get her phone, destroy the server, do something." The head of security looked at his own phone. He had just received a notification that the payroll account for his security firm, the account funded by Julian's shell company, had been frozen by the feds. "Sorry, Mr. Thorne," the bodyguard said, holstering his weapon and stepping back. "Contract is void upon non-payment. We are done here." The bodyguards walked out, leaving the billionaire alone in his fortress. From the distance, a low thrumming sound began to vibrate through the floorboards. It grew louder, accompanied by the wail of approaching sirens. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Through the darkness, I could see the flashing red and blue lights of a dozen police cruisers swarming up the long driveway. Above them, the spotlight of a news helicopter cut through the night, illuminating the manicured lawn where Julian had planned to celebrate his triumph. Julian collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he fell to his knees on the expensive Persian rug, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing now, a pathetic sound of total defeat. I turned my back on him and walked to the bar cart in the corner. I picked up a bottle of vintage champagne, the one we were supposed to open to toast 10 years of marriage. I popped the cork. The sharp sound echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. I poured the golden liquid into a crystal flute, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. I took a sip. It tasted crisp, cold, and incredibly sweet. "Happy anniversary, Julian," I whispered into the glass. The heavy oak doors of the Hamptons estate did not open for guests this time. They were breached by a tactical team wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the yellow letters FBI. The polished marble floors, usually reserved for Italian loafers and dancing shoes, were suddenly swarmed by heavy combat boots. I stood on the mezzanine landing, leaning against the railing with my glass of champagne, watching the finale of the play I had written. Julian was in the center of the living room. 2 agents had him pinned against the grand piano. He was still wearing his $3,000 tuxedo, but his face was the color of wet ash. The arrogance that had defined him for a decade had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, small man. As the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a child caught breaking a very expensive toy. "You have no right," his lead attorney screamed, trying to push past an agent. "My client has rights. This is a warrantless search. We have a warrant signed by a federal judge," the agent replied, shoving the lawyer back firmly. "And you are coming with us too. Counselor, we have digital footprints linking your firm to the laundering scheme. Hands behind your back." The lawyer's face went slack. He stopped fighting as the reality of his own complicity washed over him. Then there was Sierra. 2 female officers were escorting her toward the door. She was not walking with the grace of a runway model anymore. She was kicking and thrashing, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. I didn't know Sierra screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. I am just the PR director. I am a victim. He lied to me. Look at what he did to his wife. I am just like her. I took a slow sip of champagne. She was nothing like me. A woman in a sharp navy blazer separated herself from the chaos below and walked up the stairs toward me. She flashed a badge. Mrs. Thorne, she asked. I am Special Agent Higgins. We received your data packet. It is Ms. Vance, I corrected her softly. And I assumed you would show up eventually. We have secured the perimeter, Agent Higgins said, eyeing the scene below. You are listed as a cooperating witness and a whistleblower. You are safe now. No one is going to touch you. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the one I had not uploaded to the server but kept for this specific moment. This contains the ledger of bribes, I said, placing the cool metal into her hand, names of the FDA officials, the dates, the amounts. It connects the money from the Cayman accounts directly to their pockets. Higgins nodded, closing her fingers around the drive. This will put him away for a very long time. Down below, the agents hauled Julian to his feet. They marched him toward the door. As they passed the staircase, he looked up. Our eyes met. There was no love left in his gaze. There was only a mixture of pure, distilled hatred and a dawning, horrific realization of exactly what I was capable of. He looked at me as if I were a monster. I raised my glass slightly in a silent toast, acknowledging the end of us. Outside, the night was lit up not by stars, but by the strobe lights of the media vans. The news had broken fast. The cameras were pressed against the wrought iron gates, hungry for a glimpse of the fallen titan. I walked out the front door, flanked by agents. The reporters shouted questions, their microphones thrust through the bars like spears. Elena, did you know about the fraud? Elena, how do you feel about your husband's arrest? The narrative was already shifting. The headlines on the tickers were changing from missing wife to the woman who brought down Novagen. I ignored them all. I did not give them a soundbite or a tear. I walked past the flashing cameras to a rusted, dented Honda Civic idling at the curb. Marcus was behind the wheel. He looked tired, but he was smiling. I opened the passenger door and slid into the worn fabric seat, a stark contrast to the leather of the limousines I was used to. Ready to go, Marcus asked. Drive, I said. 1 week after the flashing lights and the arrests, I sat in an office that smelled of old leather and expensive polish. Across the desk sat Diana Sterling, a lawyer known in New York as the Iron Lady. She was the kind of woman who ate sharks like Julian for breakfast. The room was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few days. The federal freeze on Mr. Thorne's assets is absolute, Diana said, sliding a thick stack of documents toward me. However, because we proved the original intellectual property theft, your assets have been decoupled. The source code, the patents, and the rights to the algorithm. They are legally yours again. Elena, I picked up the pen. It felt light in my hand. I signed the documents. And just like that, I became the majority shareholder of the company formerly known as Novagen. I did not keep the name. The first thing I did as the new owner was issue a directive to terminate the employment of the entire board of directors. Every single man who had sat in that conference room and laughed while Julian belittled me was clearing out his desk by noon. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. It is yours. I told him, you are the interim CEO. Clean it up. Marcus, make it a company that actually saves lives, not one that destroys them. I will, Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you, Elena. I will fix this. Next, I dealt with the penthouse. I could not go back there. The walls held too many memories of my own silence. I signed the deed over to the Safe Harbor Foundation. The luxury apartment that Julian had used to impress his mistresses would now be a transitional shelter for women escaping financial abuse. It felt like poetic justice. Later that afternoon, I had to stop by the federal courthouse to finalize a deposition. That was where I saw Sierra. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman in the emerald dress. She was wearing a gray sweater, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking young and terrified. The public relations industry had blacklisted her. She was toxic. When she saw me coming down the hall, she rushed forward, desperation in her eyes. "Elena," she called out, reaching for my arm but stopping short. "Elena, please, I need a reference. I can't get a job. They are saying I was an accomplice. You have to tell them I was just doing my job." I stopped and looked at her. I did not feel anger. I did not feel triumph. I just felt a profound sense of indifference. "You made your choice, Sierra," I said softly. "You chose the winning side. You just bet on the wrong horse." I walked past her, ignoring her sobbing as I pushed through the heavy double doors. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air. I expected to feel a surge of joy, but instead, I felt a quiet, steady lightness. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being lifted from my chest. I had cut out the tumor. Now, I could heal. I did not stay in the city. I used a fraction of the recovered funds to buy a house in a quiet town upstate. It was a small, 2-story cottage with peeling white paint and a large garden that had been neglected for years. It was perfect. There were no smart locks. There were no hidden cameras. There was no voice-activated assistant listening to my every breath. It was just wood, brick, and silence. That evening, I sat in front of the fireplace, listening to the crackle of burning logs. A courier had delivered a letter earlier that day, forwarded from the Metropolitan Detention Center. The envelope was cheap and thin. The handwriting was jagged. I opened it. "Elena," the letter began. "Please, I am begging you. If you withdraw the civil suit, maybe the judge will be lenient on the sentencing. I am scared. Elena, we were partners once. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I can change. I promise." I read the words twice. They were the words of a man who was sorry he got caught, not a man who was sorry for what he did. I felt absolutely nothing. No pang of guilt. No flicker of nostalgia. I crumbled the paper into a ball and tossed it into the fire. I watched the flames lick around the edges, turning his desperate pleas into black ash. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "It means nothing." The fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse were unforgiving, but they revealed the truth that the soft lighting of gala ballrooms had always hidden. I sat in the front row, my back straight, watching the man who had once controlled my every breath. Julian Thorne looked like a ghost of himself. In just 6 months of pretrial detention, he had aged 10 years. His hair was thinning and gray, and the bespoke Italian suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His defense attorney, a desperate man paid with the last scraps of Julian's frozen assets, stood up to make one final, pathetic attempt to save his client. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice shrill, "Mrs. Vance is a predator. She is a calculator who waited for the perfect moment to strike. She is a gold digger who entrapped a brilliant innovator." I took the stand with the calm of a woman who had nothing left to hide. I did not cry. I did not shout. I simply leaned into the microphone. "I did not dig for gold," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "I built the mine. I wrote 50,000 lines of code while he slept. I debugged the neural pathways while he drank. I was not his dependent. I was his architect. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that had seen too many liars, looked down at Julian. She did not hesitate. "Julian Thorne," she declared, the gavel hovering. For the crimes of medical fraud, grand larceny, and money laundering, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. The gavel struck. The sound was final, like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. As the bailiffs moved to shackle him, I stood up and walked toward the defense table. Julian looked up, a flicker of hope igniting in his dull eyes. He leaned forward, straining against the cuffs. "Elena," he rasped, his voice sounding like broken glass. "Elena, I knew you would come. We can appeal. Right. We can fix this." I reached into my handbag. I did not pull out a handkerchief to wipe his tears. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded into a perfect square. It was crisp and white. I unfolded it slowly and placed it on the table in front of him. "This is not a letter of support, Julian," I said softly. "It is a permanent restraining order. It bars you from contacting me, approaching me, or even speaking my name for the rest of your life." He stared at the paper, the hope dying instantly, replaced by a dark, bottomless despair. "Consider it a late anniversary gift," I added, turning my back on him. "Do not ever mention my name again." "Elena," he screamed. "Elena. You can't leave me here. Elena." Two marshals grabbed his arms and dragged him toward the side door. I kept walking. I heard his screams echoing off the walls, desperate and raw, until the heavy iron door slammed shut with a thunderous boom. Then there was only silence. Beautiful, perfect silence. I pushed open the main doors of the courthouse and stepped out. The afternoon sun hit my face, warm and blinding. I was not wearing the heavy foundation or the false lashes that Julian used to demand. My face was bare, my skin breathing the fresh air. I felt lighter, as if gravity itself had released its hold on me. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a small restaurant by the Hudson River. When I arrived, Marcus and a small group of old friends were waiting at a table on the patio, the water glistening behind them. Marcus stood up and smiled, pointing to the bottle sitting in the ice bucket. It was a bottle of Dom Perignon, the exact vintage I had opened the night I took Julian down. I sat down and poured myself a glass. The bubbles danced in the light. I looked at the river, flowing steadily toward the ocean, unstoppable and free. I raised my glass high. "To the future," Marcus said. "No," I corrected him, looking at the golden liquid. "To my freedom anniversary." I tipped the glass back and drank it all, the cool liquid washing away the last taste of the past, leaving only the sweetness of a life that was finally, truly mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your location below so we can connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.